Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and RIBA members. Welcome to Let's Build, Let's Talk, our TED Talks of the future. We started with 4 live events in 2019 before lockdown, and we're now in our 3rd year of Let's Build and a leading forum for both women and underrepresented groups to be seen and heard in construction. Thank you for joining us at this, our 7th online event. Introducing the topic, we are discussing changing the culture of architecture to fit all. How does the practice of architecture affect each of us? Do we individually feel that we can make any impact in our built environment? How do we encourage those from minority communities to get more involved in the process? How do we encourage the wider establishment to value and see the importance of engaging with our communities to effect change? Our keynote speaker is Armstrong Yakubu of Foster & Partners, and he says, architecture is by its very definition an inclusive profession designing for all people. This really can only be enriched in a diverse and open environment. We'll be discussing these aspects of the profession and whether there are some endemic issues that exist to be eradicated before we can truly make this a profession that is accessible to all. In the theme for this event, we will explore the various ways in which our existing culture and manner in the delivery of our built environment can be influenced and changed in order to broaden access to and involvement in architecture and construction in this great city. My name is Annette Fisher. I'm the founder and chair of Let's Build, an architect and designer, partner of FA Global, and co-chair of Union, a consortium of female-led architects practices. I'm a former RIBA vice president, presidential candidate, and trustee of the Commonwealth Association of Architects, and I am your moderator for this evening. Our format for this evening is as usual. We start off with a keynote address, followed by the Q&A session when we invite you to write your questions in the chat. And then we'll have some announcements and our closing. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our speakers before we will start the keynote address. So our first speaker is Punya Sehmi, if you could just give us a little wave. Punya is an architect and educator with experience delivering projects within education and residential sectors at Free House Architects. She's also involved with master planning and working with listed buildings. She graduated from the University of Sheffield with first-class honours in structural engineering and architecture, and was awarded the John Carr Memorial Prize for the greatest distinction. She completed her architectural education at London Metropolitan University and the Architectural Association, attaining her Part 3 with distinction. A skilled designer and effective communicator, Punya joined Free House in 2021 as project architect, where she's currently leading the 19 million refurbishment to the iconic City of London School for Boys in collaboration with Morris and Company. Punya has worked for award-winning practices in London, including Hawkins Brown, Publica, and Tim Ronalds Architects. She's teaching in parallel and with practice at London Metropolitan University. Charlene Campbell is a partner at Green Tea Architects. She's a 34-year-old director and mother living and working in London. She co-owns a small practice in London with Spanish architect and director Bertino Ramirez. The practice is situated in an old converted tea factory, harmoniously named Green Tea Architects. And as a practice, they're passionate about good design and ethical practice and responsible action. She strives to promote the need for an inclusive culture and is committed to placing social value at the core of the practice. She says, we now live in a time more than ever, we are all extremely conscious of our living, social and working habits post-pandemic. What's more is that we're no longer designing for a stereotypical type of family. We as architects need to make architecture inclusive as much as possible when designing by offering flexible or varied spaces and buildings to meet this need. Jason Boyle has tremendous credentials. He is currently the RIBA Ambassador for Civil Infrastructure in the UK and founder of the Global Architecture Alliance. His work as a nuclear architect currently has him working on one of 3 nuclear mega projects for the UK government, leading and managing teams. He has lectured in Italy, Mauritius, Pakistan, and at the Manchester School of Architecture, and is a committee member of the Manchester Society of Architects. In 2017, Jason Boyle became the youngest fellow of the RIBA, and he was awarded Fellowship of the Royal Society of Arts. It was this elevation to fellowship in both organizations that inspired him to start mentoring others. He has successfully mentored many young architects, including one recent fellow of the RIBA. Dr. Teri Okoro is founder of TOCA, an RIBA chartered practice. She's co-chair of Union, a collaborative startup, and board member of the ARB. Recognized as an RIBA fellow and a BAME award winner, she is a design council expert and on the expert advisory group of Historic England. An inclusion champion, she also sits on the Construction Industry Council Diversity and Inclusion Panel and delivered RIBA's inaugural Diversity and Inclusion CPD. She says, changing the future of architecture will necessarily encompass pivots to people, practice, and planet, opening up to more diverse practitioners to cope with the altering context, and more varied forms of practice and collaboration will emerge together with smarter working to upskill the next generation. Our surprise speaker is Valentina Gaomosi, who's director of AKT2 and is the engineer among us. Actually, Punya is also a double engineer and architect as well. Valentina joined AKT2 in March 2005. She is a design director now. She has demonstrated her passion for high-rise complex structures and skill in a range of materials and techniques. Valentina's career has covered a diverse range of project sectors and clients, working both on the construction frontline and in design roles. Her dynamic approach to teamwork has been pivotal in the delivery of a number of intricate schemes. Her understanding of how complex surfaces and structural analysis combine enable her to create previously unimagined architectural shapes and spaces. With a sincere interest in sustainability from the beginning of her career, Valentina now leads AKT2's Sustainable Forum, writing our in-house charter and working across the practice to drive innovation and research in sustainability. Our keynote speaker, Armstrong Yakubu, studied architecture at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. He's been a part of Foster & Partners for over 30 years and is a respected senior member of the team. He has a unique role which combines his responsibilities as a permanent member of the design board with close involvement in a few carefully selected projects that benefit from his specialist expertise. As senior partner, some of his more recent work includes his close involvement with the redevelopment of the Murray in Hong Kong. This major transformation of a listed building into a luxury 336-room hotel aims to reinvent the abandoned quarter it is in, stitching together the urban fabric by linking the large green spaces that surround the site. Armstrong has been responsible for a number of high-profile projects in the USA. Currently in San Francisco, he is involved in the design of the Oceanwide Center. The 605-foot residential tower reflects the scale of San Francisco's existing tall buildings, while the 850-foot hotel, residential and office tower rises above it as a symbol of this new vertical city quarter. He was one of the lead designers in the landmark Hearst headquarters in New York, which combines the creative reuse of a historic stone base with a contemporary tower. Armstrong has a keen interest in residential buildings, the ecology of the built environment, and urban design across the world. And so I'm going to hand over to Armstrong to give his keynote address. And then later on, we will introduce Shona Snow from LHC. Thank you. Armstrong.
First.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Annette. I'm just going to say it's a pleasure to be here and really sort of congratulate you on putting together these amazing forums where we discuss some of the issues that affect our community in the architecture world today. So I'm just going to try and share my screen now, so bear with me. I can't really, I was going to talk without showing images, but I found it very difficult. So I've put some images together just to help me really guide me through the discussion we're about to have. So tell me that you can see my screen. Does that work? Oh, it says the host has disabled screen sharing.
Not yet. Elizabeth, can you give him permission to share? Can you do it now? Have a go.
There you go.
Okay.
So you should have my screen now. Got my screen?
Yes, we can see you. We can
Thank
see
you.
Yeah.
So I shall proceed. So I thought I'll start basically with this. We've been through quite a torrid 18 months. And you spoke about my sort of introduction there, which was, this statement that I made about architecture. So I'm not going to go over this, but at the heart of what we do is that we design for people. And at the heart of people really is diversity. So you can't really differentiate one from the other. And during this pandemic, on a Sunday, walking around the city where it was really, really quiet, it dawned on me just walking past St. Paul's and seeing the main entrance to St. Paul's and quite a few older, it's a three-year-old plus building, how totally inaccessible it is in terms of if you're not able-bodied, if you had any kind of disability, the front door to one of our major places of worship really is one that is not for everyone. And just getting a coffee and going around the corner, came across this fact that 300 years later, it is actually being designed to accommodate everyone. And the quote here is really quite, to have a building designed by architects without steps as a big major issue will be quite something if we can all get our heads around it. And it began to dawn on me that as architects, because we're from a very young profession, quite a male profession, we're quite able-bodied. We can think of all the buildings we've done where staircases are major design elements, but staircases by themselves are actually quite divisive if one thinks about it quite deeply. And it was interesting to see here this really statement saying, wouldn't it be a joy if architects began to look at it slightly differently? And I think that is quite an important way to think about how we move forward in shaping the culture we have. And I'm going to go back a little bit to my past when just as I was about to finish architectural education, and my tutors at the time, Jan Kapliki and Ron Heron, said, you should go have a look at this building. It's the Sainsbury Center of Visual Arts in University of East Anglia. And to look at this gallery. So I thought, okay, because my work was sort of I was in that sort of world, I was sort of very interested in technology. So off I went. This is a recent picture, but nevertheless, it was really interesting to be in a university campus with what university campus is all about, where you meet people from all kinds of walks of life. And, just students, from international students, and the building blew my mind. And I began to have a real interest in Norman Foster, and at the time, Foster Associates. This building was like no art I'd ever seen. It looked like an industrial building, but it did everything that the building needed to do. It was well crafted, it was well made, but it wasn't the British Museum. It wasn't buildings that I felt quite uncomfortable with when I was younger. This was a building that was actually quite welcoming, in a very welcome place, like a university campus. So I was able to feel quite comfortable to go in there, have a cup of tea, enjoy the art. It was nice to see, the way the building worked being all exposed. But once again, I walked in, the art was a varied amount of work. It was a lot of African art, a lot of art from Nigeria, a lot of ancient art, but also had modern pieces as well. A truly welcoming place for someone like me who was trying to be in. So I got a real interest in wanting to be, to want to continue my career. I was actually going to go back to Nigeria. I thought, I'm going to try this young architect and say, maybe I can work for him or with him in a practice. And just during the pandemic, we went there to see an exhibition. I was there with my wife again. And this is the power again, going back to the fact that you can see in this image here, the way the elderly couple here are being able to go down into the galleries below and the staircase. There is no need for signage. There are two equal possible ways to go down. just as enjoyable for people who are perhaps not as able-bodied and people who are as well. And the power of this actually probably came from the fact that, first of all, the Lady Sainsbury was elderly in a wheelchair, so the design began to influence what that meant for the main client to be somebody who was like that, but having a very, very powerful effect on what architecture can do in designing for all. And I found this very moving at the time. And actually, the building sits there. I think we all know the building. It looks nothing like any art gallery we know. And a bit of research, and this other picture here, which is the Olsen, which is now gone in Docklands, is another Foster and Partners building. And now Norman Foster comes from a very humble background. So that scheme showed a very democratic way of doing an art gallery. This project here, which is a place for the workers, shows that transparency. The workers are in with their managers, recreation, working, and the workplace, all visible within a democratic space, so to speak. And this really got my interest. Then, went in and applied, and the rest really is history. But taking all of that and saying the world is changing, which we had the Paris Accord in 2015, climate is a really, really big issue. We need to deal with it all together. So, this idea that it can be done by a select group of people or an elite doesn't quite ring true today. There is also the Sustainability Development Goals set by the UN, which actually affects us all, and it affects the built environment in quite deep and important ways. And if we're to try and get to a world where this kind of equity can exist, we have a role to play as architects. And if we're going to be the designers designing to try and meet some of these incredible goals, how do we do that if we're not within an inclusive profession? So something has to give, something will have to change. And I was reading Kate Raworth's book on the donut economics, and she sort of framed in this diagram. What I liked about this diagram is that it's an economist using a drawing to sort of make me understand economics actually for the first time. But also it made me understand as well that in our work as architects, we have a lot of the stuff in this diagram where the shortfalls in the safe, just place for humanity are things that we're involved in: housing, gender equality, education, health. And as you know, what we do as well can create the overshoots with our carbon intensive profession, because we build and we use up the earth's resources. So actually, if we were to try and create what Kate Raworth was trying to say here about a safe and just place for humanity, once again, it just shows that our impact as architects, as designers, is quite important in this challenge we have moving in this 21st century about a future where we can have a circular economy, a greener world, and one that hopefully will be around for generations to come. So we have a very large role to play. And it comes down to, again, to, if you need to do that, then we need to mobilize as one, and we cannot really have an idea that it's not a totally inclusive and diverse profession. And yes, in Glasgow this year, we're going to have COP26, and the discussion continues. So just, using Buckminster Fuller, many of you will know, you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. So in order to change something, we all really need to build a new model that hopefully makes the existing model obsolete. And I think that's quite a powerful statement and it allows you to sort of start again. You start every project really by trying to be fresh, forgetting all the things perhaps you learned in the past. You're trying to be as young and as childish as you can as you come into every new challenge. Yes, your experience is important, but in order to create change, you need to move. We're all in it together. We live in our cities, we live in our world, and we really are all in it together. And so to create the change, it has to start from the very beginning. So this idea that design, architecture, the built environment, and children do it naturally. And somehow it doesn't continue through school, but actually every child I know loves to play with Lego blocks. Every child I know loves to make things. We're born to be makers. So why isn't it stronger in the school curriculum? I think this is really important, that as we all in our community and begin to talk about these things, begin to really encourage the fact that schools should really begin to take the built environment really seriously, because a way out of many of the challenges we just spoke about in terms of sustainability goals and the environment, the built environment is going to play a very, very major. I mean, we're going to be building places where we work, places where we live, and places where we transport ourselves from place to place. So we have a big role to play, and we need to bring the children of today deeply into that conversation. Expose them to practices, expose them to all architects. This is my very good friend and colleague, Narendra here, who's a wonderful artist. And here he is with children, just demystifying what we do in many ways. You know, you're still doing exactly what you did when you were younger. And it is a wonderful profession. Yes, for sure, the profession has an issue, you know, because, you know, there's an idea that architects only come from similar backgrounds, and therefore we probably only have similar experiences and outlooks, really. So it's not a surprise that many people they're not very familiar with the people who they confront as architects. And many might not actually study architecture. I do some mentoring as well. And a lot of young people are not really involved in wanting to be architects, especially when they come from diverse backgrounds. And when they meet me, they realize that it can be just as accessible. And that really should be embedded, I think, in the educational fabric. And I think we have a voice that we can begin to shout out loud, a bit like Neil Pioneer does, you know, where he actually brings in his school, you know, architecture and design right into the curriculum. I mean, would that be amazing if that really began to feed into all the schools, you know, we see across London and the UK as well, where the young children and young people really talking about design in a really meaningful way, and not in a way that is lofty, but in a way that shows that we're trying to solve the problems that the earth really is confronted with today. And one thing I believe in now is this new thing about apprenticeship. And we've embraced it at Foster & Partners. And what I like about apprenticeship is that it's brought some wonderful young people into our fold who would normally have been in school. Now they're mixing the school and the workplace. But it's exposing us as architects to these young people, and it's also exposing the young people to the architects who've been there for a while. And there's beginning to be a learning process. So Anissa here, you know, talking to Norman, is demystifying the whole conversation. She's having a conversation with him. Familiarity is coming in there. She's now a very familiar face within the practice, and it bodes well for the future. You know, everyone within the practice now understands that people can come from all walks of life and be absolutely brilliant at what they do, and it's a natural thing. Bola is the same. I'm just running through people who I work with who are now embedded in it. They're still in architectural college. They're still doing their courses. They're still doing their part ones and part twos, but they're doing it through this apprenticeship program, which I honestly really, really think is a game changer, because it takes it away from the elitism, I think, of the schools, which we know is there, and brings it right into the idea that we're makers, really, at the end of the day, and bringing everyone in, like Bola here, for example, or Kutsai, you know, who is also, you know, someone who I work with. I work very closely with Kutsai on a very regular basis within the practice, and just exposing them to us and to the world. And the most important thing as well is that they will then graduate with a confidence that can sometimes be lacking when you come straight out of school and jump into an architectural practice. That confidence, which allows you to feel at ease, not at ease in a lazy way, but really happy to meet the challenges, is quite important. And Alfred here doing some sketches. So absolutely important, I think, that apprenticeship is embraced. I think more practices should embrace it. I think it's going to be a game changer for the future. But actually, that's young people coming in. There is still, as we know, a difficulty with people who are more senior in roles within what we do. But I was going through this talk, I suddenly realized, but you know, it is changing, and the glass ceiling is being shattered as we speak. And when you stop and think about it, 2021, you know, the Vice President of the United States looks like this, Kamala Harris, and it's, when you stop and think about it, the world is shifting quite dramatically, and we forget sometimes that it is right beneath our feet. And I think it's important that we stop and pause and go, the world is changing. And I began to think about the things that we hold dear as architects, our prizes, the things that make us, we celebrate what we do, a bit like actors do. And, you think about Doshi, who got the Pritzker Prize in 2018, and his architecture. So, here we are. There's Marina Tabison who won the Aga Khan. The Aga Khan Awards is an award that deals with architecture from a diverse world. Once again, just celebrate, you look at it, Mariam Kamara, who I saw her work and I thought it was just stunning. This sort of cultural center she did in Niger, the Mosque and Cultural Center, was absolutely stunning. And manager who I used to work with at Foster's, who's at the AAA, curating the Venice Biennale with Madeline, so these are, and she, quite young. So as we speak, it is changing. And the more one thinks about it, the more one thinks, the Serpentine Pavilion, one of those sort of celebrations of architecture in London every summer, Francis Carey came along and gave us a whole new version of what the pavilion could be. That's quite extraordinary that he did it. And when one thinks about it that way, just seeing this run through, this year, Counter Space have done it, with Sumaya Valley and her colleagues, creating this quite unusual pavilion right as we speak in here. And next year, one of my favorite artists, Theaster Gates, who he makes things out of things that we've thrown away. He's tremendous artist. He repurposes stuff. He's going to be doing next year's. I cannot wait to see how he brings his language. I love the picture of his team, which is the way I wish all architectural practices look like as he walked into them, because that's the way it should be. But he's a tremendous artist, and he'll be designing and the Serpentine Gallery next year. So changes, and then bringing it all the way back to me. This is me doing my first very major building with Norman coming to visit to inspect it in Hong Kong. A very tense day, I can tell you that for sure. But there we are together. But as an architect, and as an architect from Nigeria, also an architect of color, an architect, I did a project in Washington, D.C., where actually me being a part of the team was a real benefit. So here we are in Washington, D.C. At the time, we all know Washington, D.C. got destroyed. A lot of it downtown got burnt really during the 1968 riots after Martin Luther King died. This picture shows a site which was burned down, and the site unchanged still. And Washington D.C. was very much like this about when I started this project about 15 years ago. It's now completed, but the idea that there were all these empty sites, and the empty sites were being occupied by really horrible buildings, convention centers, buildings that gave nothing back to a vibrancy that the city once had. Yes, it had been through the riots. And there I was with the city, talking about with a developer, a proper developer, Heinz, saying, we would like to do something to this block. So the convention center was going to go, and it created 12 acres in this business district. You can see the buildings around them, they're big, and all these empty lots have become really big. And we came along, and the story we had, and I was very passionate about this, was that DC was once a place that allowed people of all America. It was a place where you could go to as an American and escape the racism really that America had at the time. So you could go to DC and go to the museums as a Black person. You could go to the streets, to the shops. It didn't have the segregation. It was a desegregated sort of haven. And I said, maybe in this case for the city, let's reintroduce the life between the street. This is me then, many years ago, 15 years ago. And here I was just arguing that the buildings were irrelevant, and actually what was most important was the space between the buildings, give the streets and the city back to the people, because Washington has a very specific demographic. When you're there, it's quite surprising when you go there. And so the project is finished now. Obviously, it's there, it's all done. But you can see that I'm not showing the buildings. I'm just showing that with my particular slants, with my particular sensitivity, it was all about not the buildings, but actually what was happening between the buildings and the people of Washington, who look, like you can see in the pictures, very diverse, reclaiming their streets. And the mayor, made a very, very big, it became a very, very big part of is now one of the most, is where the Christmas tree, for example, will be in DC if you went to visit it. And so on that note, as I say, there's David Ajayi, Sir David Ajayi. And I was talking to some of my colleagues recently saying, the Royal Academy has the most amazing show right now. And this year is quite an eye-opener. The architectural room by David in his own style, obviously it's super cool and, amazing room. But it is at this year, the summer exhibition has the architectural room by David Ajayi. And the actual curator of the whole thing is Yinka Shonibare, a Nigerian British artist, who's brought a whole new way of looking at this exhibition. And I recommend that everyone goes and sees it, because you'll be seeing the Royal Academy in a totally new light, and the summer show actually in a different way. And this idea that, you have architects and artists like him curating and showing works means that the work you see is different, and it actually is moving the needle, like, Nena Kalu, for example, she's a neurodiverse, non-verbal artist, and she has a central piece in one of the rooms where one of her works are in there. And it's quite, it really is a big deal when one thinks about it in that way. And obviously at the center of it all is Yinka's sort of particular look at how Yinka Shonibare's particular look at how these exhibitions might be. So all in all, sort of trying to say in a positive note, the change we need really, I think, is that, first of all, I think education has to accept now that in order to meet the challenges of the future, architecture plays a very, very major role. And if architecture plays a very, very major role, then the people who are going to be practicing architecture and actually contributing to how we can solve the problems have to come from all walks of life, the way they do in all the most important professions in the world, and even down to the pandemic, the people who, the couple who found with the Pfizer, came from Turkey. The world has to be absolutely unified and diverse in order to meet the challenges. It cannot come from a particular section of society. And number two, the idea then is that we need somehow to really shout out loud that it is changing as we speak, that there are people now within our practice who are breaking those barriers. And it's a shame that they're not as known as some of them could be, but actually when you look through the cracks, there's unbelievable stuff happening, a real shift, a real change. And the pandemic in a way has highlighted it in many ways, allowing us to see. And I think hopefully, I'm hoping that there comes a time when you walk into a practice and it looks like this scene, which was the picture from the Olympics, this is a typical London crowd coming to watch some sports, and that is what it looks. That's what the UK looks like, especially our cities. So actually, when you walk into a practice, it should really reflect this demographic. It should have this feel. That's not the case today. I'm very aware of that, but hopefully, in order to create the change we spoke about, it happens in this direction. So thank you. That was it. Whistle Stop Tour. It was 20 minutes, and I like to say again that, what Annette's doing here is also bringing those conversations to the fore with Let's Build. And I think it's really important that we keep on having these conversations. And thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was amazing, Armstrong. What a whistle-stop tour you've taken us on, seeing all the excellence across the world, and the fact, and making us even more aware of how important our role is as architects, and how important it is that we are all designing and influencing our built environment. I can't thank you enough. I think this is one of the ones to go down in history, really. So moving on now, we're now going to start our panel discussion. And we've got our 5 panelists, and we're also going to have Shona Snow is going to join us as well. She will share some insights with us towards the end. Let me just say a little bit about Shona before we start the discussion. Shona Snow is the Regional Procurement and Strategy lead for London, for LHC, a housing and construction framework provider who understand public sector and work in collaboration with clients to deliver innovation and improve standards of design. It's been a privilege for her to work with a young, agile and vibrant team with whom she's been delivering 3 new frameworks: the Architect Design Services, ADS 1.1, Multidisciplinary Consultancy Services, MDC 1, and Engineering Inspection Services, EIS. Previous to LHC, her role was in procurement as a business partner to the Housing and Regeneration Departments at Southwark, which is undergoing massive change with a target to build 11,000 homes. So we'll just go start our discussion, our panel discussion. And I'm going to start with Punya. Is the RIBA Part 1, 2, and 3 accreditation system really inclusive?
Thank you, and thank you very much for that talk, Armstrong. It's really kind of hopeful and encouraging call to arms, I think. So thinking about this idea of the architectural education, well, in short, I would say no, it is not. It is not truly an inclusive system. And I think we need to think about this from a number of different angles. I think the things that come to mind in the first instance are issues of cost of the education, length of it, access to practice, I think is a key issue. And then also addressing issues of diversity. So not just diversities of backgrounds, racial backgrounds, but also diversity in terms of learning needs and other needs that we sort of touched on also in Armstrong's talk. So I think if we think about it in terms of access to education initially, so we're thinking about the transition from school to Part 1, we then have issues of to consider during education, and then also during that process, access to practice, and then also progression during practice. I think all of these arms need to be considered in terms of how it can be more, the profession can be more inclusive, and how the RIBA Part 1, 2, and 3 system can be more inclusive. So I think the education system, it's sort of unsatisfactorily linear and discrete. It's constructed of these sort of discrete elements. And I don't think that it needs to be so discrete in its elements. I think that there are initiatives like the LSA, Collaborative Practice, who are sort of have made huge strides in combining and aligning practice and education, bringing them closer together. But I think the key issue in terms of that kind of linear, discrete element model is the fact that we have these transitions to deal with, during which we lose people. And it is not the case that all of those people are choosing to leave the education system or profession. It is very often to do with lack of access to the necessary opportunities. And I think the most vulnerable are our undergraduates that transition from Part 1 into their first opportunity in practice. We've had, I think, over the, especially during the pandemic situation, it's really highlighted these issues of access to practice, with graduates coming into Part 2 without having had the opportunity of practice experience. And that really impacts their ability to progress in the Part 2 course. They struggle with some of the material, not all, I must say, but some modules are very specifically focused towards practice. So I think we have to really think about how can we support our students, how can we support our young practitioners on their journey along this way? How can we set up initiatives that bring them back into the fold if they fall out of it through whatever that might be, maybe that be life circumstances or redundancies. How can we bring them back into the fold so they don't get lost in the system? And I think we've seen things like the open letter from the Future Architects Front quite recently, which has shown students sort of palpable shock at when they've come into practice for the first time. So that to me indicates, not necessarily having enough access to practice along the way. So I think we need to align these things a bit better. I think it would also be fantastic to see initiatives from the ARB and the RBA. We've obviously seen documentation of people like Punya Sehmi and Joseph Henry have been documenting in a sort of experiential way people's experiences of discrimination in practice. I think we also need to look in a more analytical way with perhaps think tanks like the Resolution Foundation, potentially looking at people like them who look at conditions of work and the impact of, for example, the COVID crisis on workers and retention in practice. Can we see collaborations between the ARB and the RIBA with them to analyse what is happening in the architecture profession specifically? Armed with that information, we as professionals, we as educators can create this new model, which I thought was a very nice way of thinking about it, Armstrong, the Buckminster Fuller quote that you spoke about, that how do we reach that new model, building a new model? In a way, I feel that there's a step of true and very objective analysis of the situation for young practitioners and educators and students going through the system. So can we see collaborations like that with sort of think tanks to get that research done? And I think perhaps the last thing which I'll touch on here is that the representation during education. So who do the students see in their classrooms teaching them, in their studios teaching them? So I think there's a huge issue there as well to address in terms of what is the kind of diversity of the makeup of the educators in the system. And as I mentioned in the sort of quote for the poster which issued, we are fundamentally in need of a pluralist profession, and the more voices we have in it, the greater the ability we have to challenge ourselves as professionals, as educators, the greater ability we then have to have a more nuanced understanding of the needs of the built environment. So I think, yes, I invite the other panelists for their thoughts and responses. It'd be great to hear.
Teri, would you, thank you, Punya, that was lovely. Teri, perhaps you'd like to kick in on that?
Me myself, yes. I think there's a growing chorus of voices that says that the existing education system is not working. And delighted to say that today the ARB put out a consultation and a new vision for altering the way architects are educated, because they've said that the part 1, 2, and 3 is not really working. It's not providing a diverse profession. And also it's just based on getting parts 1, 2, and 3. They want the profession to move towards a competency-based education. So it's based on what you can do and how you can use that within architecture, rather than just saying you've got your part 1, 2, and 3. So that consultation went out today. I'd urge all of you to go onto the ARB website. There's a link, you're able to comment on it. We need to be part of the voices who are shaping the new future of architecture. So it's not something which is 5 years away, although it will take time to get any new system in place, but we all need to comment and share our perspectives on what we think the architecture system is like, because we know that it has not really produced the diversity, the cost and all of that is actually holding people back. And even people who come into practice, we're finding that not all of the competencies which they require are actually in place for everyone. So I'll stop there and let others contribute to this debate.
Any other comments on that, on this one about the accreditation system?
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of the cost of kind of when you're actually within the kind of architectural education system, I think is quite a big thing in terms of even just like buying models and, you know, preparing kind of portfolios and going on, you know, your trips overseas, and, you know, it's an all additional costs where I think some other you know, other professions don't have, like in addition to kind of, it's not just buying a couple of books, it is in addition to kind of how much you're paying for the fees, there is this additional cost that I think maybe some are not really aware of, and I think you need to kind of factor that in as well in terms of that, you know, the entire profession of your career. So I think that does kind of deter maybe some people that are not from kind of, you know, that don't have the kind of the money and the fees for the architectural education. So I think that's another thing to kind of think about in terms of what actually happens while you're there.
Yeah, it's a very good point about the cost of the profession. It's still the longest one of all the professions, and I think it's still the most expensive. I think we've got to move on to the next question, because we have a limited amount of time. I think I'll just go to Valentina now. How are females going to be heard in the conversation?
I believe females need to shout. Unfortunately, I've lost my voice, not because of the shouting, but obviously not vocally. But I believe through their action and their achievement, it was clear from Nena and Kamara how confident they were, and the actions are there to be seen, and they are shouting more than 1,000 words. I'm a true believer that in democracy and meritocracy, not just in the architectural world. I'm an engineer, so in the construction industry in general. And if you're good at what you do and you believe in what you do, then you shouldn't fear any discrimination, and you should feel free to do what you are designed to do. In fact, the sky is your limit. And that's really how the system, I believe, should work. And if we move beyond the meritocracy, then we will end up discriminating against others as well. So we need to be very careful there. So in my view, I believe that it's down to women to demand visibility and to impose ourselves fairly in our society. By shouting through our actions, we can then encourage the world to recognize us with greater quality. The aim is, no matter our gender or the color of our skin, to be good at what we do should just suffice. That's it, simple terms.
Yeah, thanks, Valentina. I wish it was that simple, but we know it's not. Anyone else want to contribute on that one? No? Well, I mean, I would say, you know, I agree with you about shouting from the rooftops. But you see, this is why we have Let's Build, because you have to see, you can't be what you can't see. We have to see engineers like you, Valentina, as a woman doing that job, for a young engineer to think, oh, yes, I can do that, you know, and that's where it all begins. And that's why we need more women and people of color in these positions of seniority. Going to Charlene, what is the value added by increasing female participation in the construction industry?
I think we kind of bring a different perspective and a different energy. I think in the way we kind of handle projects, maybe the way we manage our staff, you know, the way we interact with clients, whether they're existing or, you know, potential clients, and also the way we kind of liaise with our peers. I think we bring kind of a different ideas and a broader approach, I think, in the way we handle kind of, you know, practice and projects. And I also think the way in which we strategize things. But I also think the main value I think we bring is changing kind of social perceptions. And I think we do that by kind of eliminating kind of challenges that I think other women have faced in the past. If you think about kind of childcare and, you know, those kind of things. And I think the main kind of value I think women can add to the profession is kind of helping other females and recruiting and kind of helping them up, you know, giving them a leg up and seeing their value. Whereas I think maybe some, you know, maybe some of our kind of older male kind of dominant people in practice may not, you know, think that they kind of deserve those roles. And I think it's up to us women to kind of promote and retain other women in practice and, you know, kind of understand kind of the challenges that they face to kind of keep them in there. And the same with what Punya was saying about education. It's about retaining them and kind of taking them to the next level and understanding why they're not kind of continuing within kind of the construction industry. So,
well, it has a lot to do, doesn't it, with the way in which firms look at the whole family issue, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think if we're open and honest, and I think this year has kind of shown, or the last 2 years have shown, there is a flexible way in which we can work, and it's kind of male and female, and, you know, the practices don't break down, and, you know, we can still achieve great things, you know, even if we are at home and coming into the office. And I think it's both for male and female. Like if someone wants to kind of go and watch their son play football, it's not going to, you know, work from home that day. It's not going to, you know, stop a project. And I think we have to think about the life cycle as well of projects. Like some take, you know, 5 years to build. And I think having someone maybe out for a couple of months, it's not really going to impact. And I think if practices have systems in place where there is this transition and people can kind of come in and out, and I think you manage that, I don't think it is as bad as what people think.
Yeah. Jason, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to really say that my last major project was led by a woman. So she was the construction manager on a multi-million-pound project, and it was the only project, I think, to finish on time and under budget. So that's a fantastic thing. And my current construction manager on a much even bigger project is also female as well. So the qualities are there for everyone to see. Yeah.
That brings us quite neatly on to a question for you. What can architecture learn from other industries, and why is it so resistant to change?
Yeah, two parts to this one. So I'm not going to give you the corporate view of the nuclear industry, and there's lots of things that have been put in place over the last 5 years, which are really good things, and you know, so I don't really want to talk about that. I just want to talk about my kind of experience in the nuclear sector. So there's five architects in our company of 12,000 people, and I'm surrounded by engineers of every discipline. So I feel a little bit in the sort of minority of working life, you know, and I think one of the things that we do and we look at, you know, just because you're very good technically as an architect in this industry, it doesn't automatically mean you've got the right behaviors. And I think the industry does focus a lot on the competencies around those behaviors, and they give them equal sort of levels in promotion. If you want to go promotion, you can't just be promoted for being very good and technically good at what you do. You also have to have the right behaviors. So that's in leadership. And I think there's a lot of architects out there I've experienced in the past that might be very good architects, but are not very good leaders or managers. And so it's about being really open, honest about, you know, with yourself and understanding that you may need to change. I mean, if you don't admit that there's something wrong and put your head in the sand, how can you change? And so I think, you know, what we do really well is we do take a lot of apprenticeships, and I really like what people have said before, you know, that taking apprenticeships on reduces that cost, you know, and reduces the debt burden that we can all argue that it can be argued it's a tax, but I think that really does put people off, because I'm from a working class family in the northeast of England, and I think if you know the debts that university students take on in architecture, that would have really put me off, and I don't think I would have become an architect. That's me being honest there. So I think that, you know, working in our sector, we work as one. We work in projects, and we all work together. We all work as a team. We're not sort of in these silos. It's an architect's practice and then an engineering practice, and you know, we all work together in one space on these projects. So that's a really positive thing, because you can see people from all walks of life. The management are not in offices. It's very flat, and I think that's a great thing to, you know, it's a great way forward, and architects' practices could learn from that.
Thanks very much, Jason. Thanks a lot. Valentina, would you like to add anything to that, since you're an engineer as well, working with architects?
Yeah, so yeah, from an engineering background, apologies again for my voice, shouting too much to my colleagues. We need to learn from a variety of different sectors, but that doesn't mean that engineering cannot be diverse. My company, personally, we are really diverse. I mean, the two founders of my company are both Black people, Hanif Kara and Herbert Taylor. So for me, it's really interesting to see, to witness this debate, because it never crossed my mind to a certain extent, because they were always ahead of everyone from an engineering point of view. And they were respected, and everyone loved to have them around the table and around for a discussion. And similarly, women slowly are coming through the ranks. So I'm one of the of a few design directors, women in our company. So it's brilliant to see that new will come through. And I'm not saying we're 50-50, but certainly there are a lot of women of different ethnicities as well. And I believe that is a natural course. I think education plays a massive role. I think opportunities can be out there. It's just they need to be grabbed to a certain extent. And I think that is an important, like in every various sectors. I mean, I will quote later in my final speech, okay, a completely different sector where they face the same issues, and they had opportunities to grab.
Thanks, Valentina. Teri, how do we remove unconscious bias from the culture of architecture? Can't hear you. We can't hear you, Teri.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't unmute. Yeah, so I was saying that we need to split this into two, because what's unconscious bias, it's where we are not aware of the consequences of some of the things, maybe because we're using stereotypes or just because we didn't think about it. And then what is culture? It's the way we do things around here. So really we should ask ourselves, is the way we do things in practice inclusive enough? And maybe it's because we just haven't considered it, and it's the way we've always done things. And so I'll just give a few examples, like in recruiting. Do you just ask people to ask a friend when you're trying to recruit, or do you go out to a wider public to recruit? Because people who don't have networks or part of, you know, the in-click, they never get the opportunity if roles are not advertised. So practices that have those kind of recruitment processes, you know, are using the unconscious bias because they don't realize the consequences. Likewise, do you see a name which is unfamiliar and you think, I'll put that aside for now? Because that way your unconscious bias is limiting the range of candidates who may come into your practice. And then if your practice doesn't have proper processes for progression, what is the criteria for moving on? Is it people who socialize and go to the pub? Is it certain people who are giving those, you know, brilliant projects, the stretch projects? Is it those who are mentored, those who are visible with clients? If not everyone gets that opportunity, then your processes for progression are not going to be fair. to all. Then let's look at the working practice. You know, if you don't have flexible working, we know now with the pandemic, people are able to work from home. But if you have a culture of long hours, there's certain people who just cannot hack it and they'll leave the profession. Also, not giving credit where credit is due, because we know there's lots of people who have to work twice as hard to get the recognition. And if your unconscious bias is not, you know, sort of recognizing their effort, will they stay in the profession or will they progress? But let's look at how we design as well. Is our design inclusive enough? Armstrong spoke about, you know, accessibility, but also about the external areas and safety for women, you know, the spaces in between buildings, and also for designing for other cultures and for our aging population as well, because we know UK's population is getting a lot older. Do our designs take that on board? And then also our education as well. Does it look at other, you know, cultures and their architecture, or is it just, you know, European centric? And then the role models we have, you know, we've spoken about role models at university, role models in the workplace. And for those in practice, when there are opportunities to collaborate, you know, who do the major practices go to collaborate with? Except maybe they have to tick the diversity box, but usually, you know, they may go to people like them. So there's lots of areas in which unconscious decisions, you know, creates barriers for others. So we need to think a bit more intentionally about what we do and what the outcome is if we want to get rid of unconscious bias in our culture of architecture. I'll see what other people have to say on that.
Thanks, Teri. Has anyone else want to add to that, perhaps? Punya? Armstrong?
Yes, sure, I'll contribute. I think in terms of, I think some of the things that you mentioned, Teri, I think also to add to that is, if anyone hasn't seen them, Sonia Watson, who's the Chief Executive of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust, which is now called Blueprint for All, she issued, I don't remember exactly where it was, have to have a little look, but I think it was 7 steps to diversify your practice. And there were 7 very simple to implement, simply implementable, it was 8 steps to diversify your practice, really simple steps, and specifically focused around recruitment, I think. And there's also, I'd say to practices out there too, there's also a recruitment agency, Urban, who's partnering with Blueprint for All. And they have as their mission, I think, to sort of help diversify practices. So I think, you know, there are things out there to that practices can proactively do to diversify their recruitment processes.
Thank you very much, Punya. Okay, now we'd like to open the conversation to the audience. I haven't seen any questions in there at the moment yet, so we're going to go to Armstrong to discuss what is the culture of architecture.
Thanks. I was reading the press earlier on today, and there was a statistic that came through, which was from the Creative Industries Policy. I don't know if anyone has read it, but it said that architecture is the most privileged profession of all the creative ones, by some 73%, which I was quite surprised by. I was like, wow, it's higher than judges, and, you know, so what we consider to be elite professions, architecture is up there, which was quite a surprise. And it sort of, you realize then that if you're going to have 73% of a profession of, like, I think it's not just in the UK, I think it's probably a worldwide thing, all having similar backgrounds, which we've spoken about, you know, backgrounds that have a certain level of opportunity built into them. That means, therefore, that they have similar experiences, like I mentioned earlier on. And it also means that perhaps the outlooks will be similar as well. And I just wonder how that, you know, sort of meets the 21st century issues that we're all dealing with today, which really is a sort of, you know, roll your sleeves up. We've got to do something here. We can't continue. Status quo is no longer an option. And it's an interesting one. So I suppose the 73% that I read today is in the past because it's happened. So that's where we are today. But I'm just thinking in a more futuristic way, or thinking ahead. How does one break that cycle? And I think, and I think once again, the culture, like I think we mentioned, the culture of the expensive models, the expensive drawings, the travel, because architects need to travel, So there's so many things built in that kind of put it there into that world of influence and affluence. But at the heart of what we do is problem solving. So I just wondered whether it's, how do we break that culture? Because the culture is what it is. We all know what it is. But how does one break that culture? An interesting one is actually the cost of, and I think that's to do with mentorship, bursaries, scholarships, which you will get in many other parts of the educational system, but perhaps not quite as strong in architecture. So maybe that is something that we should begin to have conversations about. And that is really is in the heart of the RIBA. The RIBA is like out there to you. Is there a way to create something that allows other young people to be able to have these tools that are necessary in architecture on top of it, on top of what makes it quite a high cultural sort of profession. I think that is one thing that I just thought about today. But ultimately, I think if we move into the future with the architectural bodies around the world, and that's we're here in the UK, RIBA, ARB, is basically, if we're to meet the challenges of today and in the near future, and status quo is definitely not an option, and it does mean all hands on deck. How do we bring all hands on deck to help with the challenge? Because we need to shift. And I used the example of the staircase, for example. I'm sure there are many architects here who love to design staircases, and they will spiral and they will fly over. We all do it, and that is how divorced we are from the reality, because 20% of the population is actually got some disability, of which there'll be some who will not be able to use that staircase. So how do you make your staircase not feel like a barrier in your design? And how do you then, and if you don't have somebody within your life that is able to experience that, and especially your immediate life, your workmate or your work colleague, then how would you make that leap? I think it's quite difficult to make that leap. So it's important that those people everybody gets drawn into our profession somehow. And I don't think it's actually an option any longer. I think it's the only way to solve some of the issues that we're going to be confronted with in the near future.
Thanks, Armstrong. Actually, that statement around the staircase is actually so basic and so obvious, but not obvious. It's kind of in your face, but not in your face. You walk past it because you can walk and walk up it, but if you can't, as you say, it's like a wall. We've got a question from the audience. As the world is getting back to normal and following George Floyd's murder, this is from Femi, and the Me Too movements, do you really think that as a profession we can continue to put into practice what we've all been wishing for and create a fairer, more equitable society, or will we just end up paying lip service to it all? Do you want to kick off on that, Armstrong?
Can you say that again, please? Just
as the world is getting back to normal and following George Floyd's murder and the Me Too movements, do you really think that as a profession we can continue to put into practice what we've all been wishing for and create a fairer and more equitable society, or will it just end up being paying lip service to it all? I mean, can we do it?
I'm an optimist, and that comes with all of
really?
us. Yeah. So, but the answer for me, obviously, is yes. I cannot believe that any of us were going to go back to practice. And I think someone mentioned, one of the bugbears about practice sometimes is maternity leave. I just heard, you cannot tell me today that we cannot be more equitable and inclusive, because we've just had to go through a torrid 18 to 20 months altogether. So with that mindset, why can't we move forward with all we've had to do together somehow in the way we practice and in the way we design? I will be very surprised if moving forward, that we go back to doing all the things we did 18 months ago. I know our politicians are pushing us to go back to where it was, but for us in the built environment as problem solvers and designing for people, I just find it very hard to imagine that any architect, regardless of what status they come from within the society, can honestly put pen to paper or fingers to a keyboard and begin to create that doesn't take on board all that we've been through. And as you begin to pull people into your practices, you must want diverse voices. You must want to learn about the people that have been that have really literally been left behind. How do you create a better world? And so I honestly do not believe I can feel it within my practice. Status quo is no longer an option. And I just think with our way of thinking as designers, I just can't imagine that we will just revert back to what was, because I think that literally should be consigned to history.
Armstrong, I think that is a very good point. I really hope that we don't. And I think this is where we have to, work to ensure that it doesn't. Well, I think we're out of time for the questions. There are a couple of really interesting comments in the chat. Please have a look at it about the, Teri's put a link in about the ARB consultation, and Helen Taylor's given us information about the RIBA committee's deadline for tomorrow. If you want to apply, please click onto that now. So I think now I'd like us to have Shona Snow on to talk of the LHC and tell us about demystifying frameworks. Shona.
Thank you so much, Annette. So good evening. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be alongside your very inspiring and accomplished guests. So I work for LHC. They are a public sector owned organisation, been around for a long time, over 50 years. And all we do is deliver frameworks, construction related frameworks for any public sector authority to access. So I'm on the other side of the table. I work on behalf of the commissioner. But in layman's terms, what are frameworks? They're a way of pre-vetting suppliers so that public sector can quickly access a pool of suppliers that they know they can trust without having to run a full-length tender, which can take at least 6 months. So they use it for speed and also for quality. Now, we recently announced the launch of our new Architect Design Services Framework, ADS 1.1, which now offers the most diverse range of businesses ever seen on a high-profile framework of this kind. A high number of them are micro SMEs who have never before been able to get onto a public sector framework. We have 7 Black-led practices and many female-led, and we are very proud of this. It is groundbreaking and innovative in its approach, and with the talent it now offers to public sector commissioners. So we believe it can play a part in changing this culture of architecture, which is just so inspiring to hear people today talk about. So we think it can be part of the change that you want to see. So I've got a few minutes to demystify frameworks this evening. So I'm going to do that by going through 5 points. So point 1, I'm going to start by being very honest with you about frameworks. They might sometimes seem like the holy grail, but they do have their pros and cons. They aren't necessarily for everyone. So what are the cons? It's not a guarantee of work. So you can get onto a framework, you can bid for contracts and you may not win contracts. So they're speculative by their very nature. They're designed around client needs. And it's our job to then get clients interested in using them and promoting them, and also for the appointed companies to do so. But it's a big investment, it's a big decision to do it. What are the pros though? So you get access, you as a supplier would get access to a huge range of clients just through one intermediate. So you apply once, but you get access to multiple clients. And it's a swifter contracting process all around. So like I say, instead of the usual 6 to 9 months tendering process, it's a quicker process. So point 2, well, things are changing. That is really exciting. But I know how time consuming and expensive bidding can be. So I would say don't rush that decision. It might be the right time for you, it might not. And to answer that really involves engaging with the commissioning authority to understand what they're looking for. But remember, there will always be a public sector need for regeneration in new homes, always. So never feel you've missed the boat, because you haven't. Point 3, LHC and Southwark, this was a partnership project with Southwark Council. We recognise we do need to do more to support new bidders. So frameworks and huge contracts are not everything. So there is also a need to give lower risk or smaller work to local SMEs and to give them the experience and time to increase their capacity and for larger scale work. So do look out for that kind of work. So register on the procurement platforms, register on Find a Tender, consider collaborations, partnerships, go to pre-tender engagement events. Point 4, learn to tell a story. So storytelling is one of the most important and most human things about us. I mean, I really enjoyed the keynote presentation. It was, a number of stories in that presentation. It's very easy to think, well, bidding, oh, it's bureaucracy, it's just bid writing. Someone else is going to have the skills that I don't, I never will, or I'll have to pay someone. It's yet another barrier. But, a colleague of mine who studied architecture herself said to me this year, the most important thing we were told at architecture school is you need to tell the story. Now, the architects who were successful on our ADS framework knew how to tell a story. Sometimes they were actually really simple schemes they were presenting to us, but they were just so rich and thoughtful and full of care and dedication, layers of innovation. And that's what it means to present your case study, just to bring it to life, to tell us what the journey was, what impact it had, and inspire us. So just, really embrace that. And finally, point 5, I do recognize that public sector can seem like this huge, amorphous, anonymous, nebulous entity that can't ever be really understood or pinned down. But, it's not entirely the case. Public sector has people like me who are really passionate and care about what they do and want to make a difference. And that's why I wanted to be involved in delivering this framework and others. But sometimes these people, they don't necessarily know how to do that, or they themselves become ground down and weary, or maybe it's not the right time, or they don't have the leadership support. But LHC do have the leadership support, and we do have the passion and commitment to make a difference. So we're just one organization, but we are well networked, and we are trying to change the culture of architecture on the client side. So we have a platform to do that, and we will use that. So I didn't come into public sector just, push paper around, tick boxes, do things the way they've always been done, and avoid all risks. We took risks with this framework, and we pushed and challenged ourselves. We stripped away unnecessary requirements. We really honed into what really matters in architecture. We evaluated diversity, equality, and inclusion. We looked at how schemes are designed, not just the aesthetic end result. And we looked for practices who really understood community engagement and could relate to them, perhaps even with lived experience of social housing and council estates. So in summary, frameworks aren't for everyone. They do have pros and cons, and it's important, it's responsible of me to remind you of that. Don't rush your own decision to bid. You won't miss the boat. Look out for smaller contract work to gain experience. Learn to tell your story. It's the most human thing about us. And finally, public sector is full of people who really care about what they do and are willing to take risks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Shona. That is a really very, very helpful and supportive. It's great to see it coming from the other side of the fence. So at this point, we're getting close to our end. So I'm going to call on our marketing team to give us the vote of thanks before Valentina does the closing. So over to you guys.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Akamo, the Secretary of Let's Build, and I'm also part of the marketing team, as Annette said. I'm actually currently an architectural apprentice at Scott Brownrigg. So what Armstrong said in his keynote, it really touched me because I can relate to that. It took 2 years, of freelancing and really finding how I wanted to progress in architecture before I found, the architectural apprentices program. and I'm loving it so far, and meeting other apprentices has really been amazing. I would like to really, really thank all of our speakers. I would like to thank Punya Sehmi of Free House, Charlene Campbell of Green Tea Architects, Jason Boyle of the Global Architects Alliance, Teri Okoro of TOCA and Union, and our surprise guest, Valentina Gaomosi of AKT2, and of course, our keynote speaker, Armstrong Yakubu of Foster & Partners. Thank you all so much for all your amazing words. I know I'm inspired. I know every student that is in this room as well is also inspired. So thank you.
Who's next?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So that was really nice. Hello, everyone. I am Tyler Ibanja, and I'm the social secretary here with Let's Build. And I'm a member of Homegrown Plus with Neil Pinder as well. And I'm an aspiring wannabe architect who's still studying and a designer. I'm a Bartlett alum, but I'm currently studying in Sweden at Umeå University, doing a year study in the Masters of Architecture and Urban Design. And I'm currently working on a built project here in Umeå, as well as studying. But I would really like to give thanks to our amazing Let's Build committee members, Neil, myself, Femi, Rashid, Francetta, Sei, Cheryl, Shaynisia, Lemma, and our founder and chair of this evening, Annette, as well as Elizabeth, who just spoke. Without these people here, we wouldn't be able to have such amazing, thought-provoking, and very inspiring conversations. To say it's a privilege to be involved and to be a part of this space is a massive understatement. Without spaces like these, how can we really kind of change the culture of architecture and the construction industry and really get to grips with, you know, the things that we're working in? And, you know, as a student and someone who is studying and, you know, trying to get their foot in the door, it really does give me hope to sort of continue on with my journey in architecture. So again, I just want to give a massive thank you to our committee.
Thanks, Tyler. Who's next?
I'm Francetta, the creative copywriter and content writer for Let's Build. I'm so proud of the marketing. Myself, Elizabeth, Shaynisia, and Tyler, we've all been promoting the events, the last few events, and I believe we've done such a great job. Yeah, I'm doing all the social media captions and newsletters and things. And also don't forget Let's Build Academy, which is a new kind of service where we're wanting young students to, we're helping young students to get paid work and mentorship for a year. So yeah, here's the poster. So please check out the website, have a look about it, read through it. And thank you for an interesting evening, and well done to the team and the committee and everyone that's a part of Let's Build.
Shaynisia. Thank you, Francetta. Shaynisia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can everyone just hear me? I just want to double check that there's no issues or anything. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. My name is Shaynisia Byfield, and so I joined Tyler as the social secretary here at Let's Build. I am a construction project manager with a quantity surveying background. I actually fell into the industry as a biology graduate, so I am a huge advocate for a lot of people joining the built environment as career changers for young people. So yes, also I am working towards the Chartered Institute of Building as well as Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. So I would like to say a brilliant thank you for all of our sponsors that we have here today. So we have Places for People, the RIBA and Yanga TV. We would also like to welcome anybody who would like to become a sponsor or make a donation to help us keep this going. Please go to our website. We've also got one more event that is actually coming up in December. So please do watch this space. We would also like your suggestions for or any nominations for future panelists, so please get in touch with us. If you are a female-led practice, we'd like to know who you are and also to be able to promote you and to demonstrate our network with you to develop more projects by women for women in construction. So we thank you all for attending today and for making this an amazing event. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Shanizia. Okay, I will just call now on Valentina to sum up our evening and to give our closing. Valentina.
Right, so first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a very interesting debate and quite a lot of good things came out of it. On a personal note, someone that I've always really been admired is a woman called Margarita Huck. She once said that it would be up to women to prove themselves, to demand to be considered. She said, I don't believe that is that difficult. It is all up to us. And the men you are against us and who don't have faith in us, they can be stimulating. So they can force us to react. They motivate us to prove that they are wrong. Margherita was a late 20th century astrophysic. Is an Italian, very famous, and she championed civil rights throughout her life. She's also got an asteroid named after her. So that was, she was that important. So she was truly living as a woman in a man's world. But back to the conversation of architecture. So good design means good design for all. And to serve everyone, we need everyone as designers. Could someone design a football stadium if they don't really understand the sport? Or can a man design a delivery room in an hospital if he's never given birth? That's why we need diversity. I once read in The Guardian that our built environment would be very, very different if it was designed by people that push prams. There will be ramps a bit everywhere, a bit like Armstrong with the stairs. We all deserve good design, and this isn't about appearance or aesthetics. This is beyond that. This is about shaping who we are and how we feel. Good design should make feel whole people, like that part of the greater good. Design is a bit like a soundtrack to our life that we don't really know is playing. It is true to how we are feeling with subconscious messaging, and it's thoughtful. Good design is really thoughtful, and it can make you feel seen, respected, and understood. And it is the human scale that we are supposed to be designing for. And this thread has been running through the whole discussion tonight. I'm a woman, I'm a wife. Every morning I take my girls to school and then I go to work. A lot of people in this room, virtual room, are working in the architectural and engineering to make the world a bit of a better place. And this means a better place for everyone. I work within a design-driven engineering practice, and I'm very lucky. We are designing built environment that some way or another will change the people's life, and that is our aim every day going into work. As designer, all of us, our social responsibility is immense, and we are all trading a quest to reach everyone and to provide for everyone's needs. It is pretty intense challenge. The British schooling has been mentioned a few times from an university point of view. I think the British schooling system is really antiquated. Just well before. We are asking 14-year-old children to somehow make an educated decision on what subject they are going to specialize in their GCSEs. That will limit their ability at the A-levels and even more the degree. And to some extent, the available choice of career. We should really instead be encouraging young people to not to limit their knowledge, but to broaden it and as long as possible and as wide as possible. This is about teaching them not what to think, but how to think. And that I think is important. They will have then the entire life to make a balanced decision of what they want to do. And that will make them better persons as well. Secondly, I think we need also diversity is a little bit more than just a tick box exercise. Any company inclusions of women, BMNE, LGBT, or other demographics is only authentic if the organization is intrinsically lives and exists that way. And I know AKT is a clear example of that. That's why I'm proudly saying this. Only take part in the Pride Month if you're showing and feel support. This isn't a communication exercise, it's crucial quality of an organizational culture. The question I always was about women need to shout. Yes, not vocally. Women need to shout through the live action and achievement. But I do believe I'm a romantic, and I believe that things can change and they can improve. I think we need to be good in what we do and believe that in what we are doing, more importantly. And we shouldn't fear discrimination, as hard as it is, and as twice as hard we have to work. I've been through it as a woman in a male-dominated environment as well. So in the architectural conversation, how can women be heard? I think Margherita was right. I think it's up to women to take ownership and to break through and assume sort of limitations. And I've also think that there is another bigger question, and how women can be listened to. And that's a question that not only demographics, through our action, we will be able to solve. So it's not something that can be done very, very shortly. Otherwise, it is indeed down to women to become an equal contributor to the global stage. And I believe of any color or ethnicity. Today, we are in 2021, it is still imperative that women demand a voice, and I think that is important. Being heard and being listened to. One, doesn't matter how loud we should shout, and it will always do what we do. And okay. That's me.
Fantastic, Valentina, thank you so much. The only last bit, a little bit of thing we have to do is just to take one photo. So if I can ask all the panelists and all the committee members just to make sure their cameras are on, and Elizabeth, if you can just do one screenshot, and any audience members who also wish to participate, so we can have one group photo, that would be fantastic. Okay, are we done? Okay, yeah, fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming. See you in the next time. Next one's 9th December 2021. Have a great evening. Goodbye.